There is really no player who divides opinion quite like Sergio Busquets. The 34-year-old veteran Catalan midfielder tends to either be highly rated or frequently criticized by culés, rival fans, and pundits alike. At the end of every match in which Barca concede goals and lose, many a finger is often pointed in the direction of Busquets, as many cite his lack of pace and athleticism as an obvious Achilles heel of the man fondly known as El Pupo, the Octopus. Whether or not that is indeed hurting Barca is debatable. What isn't debatable though is that Xavi Hernandez sees his fellow Catalan and former teammate as an indispensable part of his team, one that Barcelona will surely struggle to replace, as rumors abound that Busi is bound for the MLS outfit Inter Miami. So, what do Barcelona do to replace a player as vital as Busquets while still keeping the team ticking like they usually do? Is there a Busquets region that Xavi can ask Laporta to buy, or will Xavi Hernandez have to rethink and restructure his team going forward? Let's take a few moments to explore these questions in the latest edition of The Curious Case. This is The Curious Case of Sergio Busquets. There are not many defensive midfielders or holding midfielders who one could see being a like-for-like replacement for the lanky Catalan. Many have drawn comparisons between Busquets and fellow Spain international Rodrigo Hernandez, better known as Rodri. Others have likened the Catalan pivot to Chelsea's Italian-Brazilian Jorginho, and just for some variety, I'm throwing in Real Sociedad's Martin Zubimendi as a possible successor to Sergio Busquets for Barcelona. So, how do these players stack up to Busquets? Well, let's take a look by starting with Rodri. Let's get the obvious things out of the way here, guys. Okay, like Busquets, Rodri is Spanish. Like Busquets, he stands at least 6 feet 2 inches tall, and both Rodri and Busquets operate as a single pivot, and both rose to prominence under the tutelage of Pep Guardiola, who has used both of them as the ball-winning and ball-recycling metronomes of his vintage Barcelona and Manchester City teams. Having said all of that, there are yet more similarities between the two pivots. A look at their stats from last season shows how the two recorded almost identical average figures for key passes, crosses, long balls, through balls, tackles, fouls, and blocks. In addition to all that, their heat maps look almost like carbon copies of each other. Seriously, with really the only visible difference being that Rodri has more activity in the opposition box. This is probably where the biggest difference between Busquets and Rodri can be seen, I would say, because Rodri has more goal involvements than Busquets, standing at 9 versus 2 from last season in that regard. That's something that one could argue stems from the inherent differences in temperament of the two players, and probably it's also influenced by the fact that Rodri is more of an athletic player with greater aerial prowess than Sergio Busquets is. Or it could come down to the differences in the tactical systems currently being deployed by Xavi Hernandez and Pep Guardiola. Xavi has a more rigid system that demands a bit more tactical discipline and asks strictly the interiors to make late runs and runs from deep into the opposition area. With Pep Guardiola, there seems to be a bit more positional fluidity, as very often you will see Gundogan and Rodri interchange positions between pivot and interior, and either of them can run into the box regardless of which position they're playing on. It's also worth bearing in mind here that for all his attributes that stuck up to and surpassed those of Busquets, Rodri falls short of his nation's captain when it comes to dribbling ability, as the citizen only managed a 50% success rate from his attempted dribbles, while the Catalan boasts a ridiculous 90% success rate. Once again, this is based on the stats from last season, so, looking at just the most recent form that they've had. But otherwise, if we're talking about Busi regions, they probably don't come closer than Rodri. But of course, there are a few others who come close to being a Busquets region. Take Jorginho and Zubimendi, for instance. Stylistically, no one comes as close to looking like Busquets as much as Jorginho does, I think. I mean, especially if you're using the eye test, right? Much like Rodri, he too has similar advanced matrix stats to Busquets, everything from key passes, tackles, pass completion, interceptions, dribbles completed, number of times dribbled past, fouls per game, clearances per game, and blocks per game too. Unlike Rodri and Zubimendi, whose weaknesses though tend to be different from those that we see with Busquets, Jorginho actually shares many of the same weaknesses that the Catalan has. Much like Busquets, Jorginho's lack of athleticism can see him get caught out in transition, and he tends to have minimal incursions into the opposition penalty box. Well, except for when he has to take one of those, hippity hoppity penalties, because, then he gets into the opposition box. And in fact, penalties aside, his goal retain, it's more or less just the same as Busquets. Then, of course, there is Martin Zubimendi. He's a bit different from Rodri and Jorginho when it comes to comparisons with Busquets, but I did put him in here for selfish reasons, I guess, because Zubimendi possesses many of the capabilities that Busquets has shown throughout his Barcelona career. So if we take a look at them here, just looking at this little pentagram, whatever thingy magic this is, that just illustrates a player's style, you can see that the shapes we're getting here, they're pretty similar, between Busquets and Zubimendi. It's just that Zubimendi is probably, better at defending, unlike Busquets, Zubimendi tends to win a lot of aerial duels and to be a bit more defensively sound, for lack of a better term. He excels with the number of clearances and number of shots successfully blocked, managing roughly twice the amount that Busquets registered during the last season, an aspect of the game where he also bests Rodri and Jorginho too. However, his reading of the game could do with some work, as currently he is about half as efficient as Busquets when it comes to blocking passes by standing in their path, Don't necessarily want to call it an interception, but just getting in the ball's trajectory when someone is trying to pass past you. Yeah, I just made it sound really dumb. But of course, at only 22 years of age, that is something that Zubimendi can definitely work on and improve, especially under the guidance of a manager like Xavi, a mind like Xavi, someone who used to be in that midfield and dominate that thing. Zubimendi would also probably do with being tasked with a more technically challenging role, as playing for Barca as a single pivot would require him to make more progressive carries, a duty he often abdicates to Silva or Kubo or one of the wingbacks at La Real. So, those are the three best candidates, I think, for a direct or like-for-like replacement of Busquets that Barcelona could consider. Now, are they realistic targets? Well, in the case of Rodri, probably not, simply because he would cost a crap ton of money and Barca might probably not have enough resources for such a costly acquisition, especially taking into consideration that, the likes of De Jong and Nico are still on Barcelona's books. So, yeah, it's safe to say that Rodri would be a pipe dream. But having said that, I also said that Lewandowski was a pipe dream. So maybe the second option in Jorginho is probably the most attainable or realistic, if you'd rather. The Italian has even been recently linked with Barcelona, with rumors having emerged in the past few weeks that the player may have in fact been offered to Barcelona by his agent. Had such a thing probably happened 3 years ago, Barcelona would definitely have a harder time turning him down, but with the recent reduced role that Jorginho has been playing at Chelsea, and with Barca's preference to build a young core of the team, Jorginho, as Busquets-like as he may be, and that he definitely be, he might just be too old for Xavi Hernandez to greenlight that one, so we will probably forego this option. I don't know, or say that it's probably unlikely to happen. That would then leave us with Martin Zubimendi. Now, not only is Zubimendi young enough to be in the first team framework for the best part of the next decade, but he is also young enough to be trained, retrained, and further modeled in the image of a player like Sergio Busquets. Zubimendi wouldn't come cheap either, Sociedad are going to want their bag. Just look how much they got for Isak. But he would certainly not command the type of transfer fee that a player like Rodri would. So, I would say he's a realistic option for Barcelona. Now, before we wrap this up, there is a surprise fourth option that I feel Barcelona have for replacing Busquets. And no, this option is not a big name player like Fabinho at Liverpool, nor is it a hipster pick like Maxime Lopez at Sassuolo or Pepelu at Levante. Yes, I dug that deep in my research. But no, Barca's fourth option for replacing Busquets is in fact not even a player, but rather a change of system. Xavi would have to reinvent Barcelona from playing with a single pivot to using a double pivot system. Now, obviously, this isn't something that I think he wants to do, especially since we know in the past that Laporta has come out to say a Barcelona team should play with a 4-3-3. But, players like Frenkie de Jong, Kessie, Nico, Gavi, and Pedri, they are all more than capable of playing in a midfield double pivot. We've seen it already at Barca, we saw it under Koeman. And should Barca not have the necessary resources or desire to sign a Busquets-like midfielder, then employing that double pivot might just be the way forward. That is that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in and for listening this far. If you're watching on YouTube, please do let me know your thoughts in the comment section on what you think Barca should do to replace Busquets. For those tuned into the podcast, please do leave a good rating, 5 stars. I'm just saying that would mean a lot. It would mean the world. And lastly, if you are a first-time listener, whatever platform you're listening from, do hit that subscribe and follow button. And if you're on YouTube, what are you still waiting for? Hit that like button. You've listened to the whole thing. Like it. Thanks once again. Have a great day. And Forza Barca.